It began in silence. The kind of silence that seeps through the trees long after the last bird has gone quiet. In the hills of southwestern Virginia, where the roads dissolve into dirt and the mountains fold in on themselves like secrets too ashamed to be told, there once lived a family whose name you won't find in any town registry, though their descendants still breathe the same air. Their story wasn't erased. It was buried. The locals call them the Holler People. To outsiders, that might sound harmless. But for generations, whispers have haunted the valley, of a bloodline so entangled, so devoutly loyal to itself, that no outsider dared marry in. Some said it was pride. Others called it a curse. But the truth, as it turns out, was far darker than either. The earliest record dates back to the 1820s, a small settlement along the Clinch River, founded by a man named Wrens. A quiet farmer, hard-handed, God-fearing. He had 2 children, a son, Jonah, and a daughter, Mary. The 2 were inseparable, raised in isolation miles from any neighbor. Elias' wife had died young, and the children only had each other, day after day, season after season, while their father drifted further into his own grief. When he died in 1842, Jonah and Mary were left alone on that mountain ridge. And that's when the story truly begins. Neighbors, the few who dared approach, later said they saw smoke from the chimney, heard laughter echoing through the trees, but never saw visitors. Winter came and went. Then, in spring, Mary began to show signs of pregnancy. When a trader passed through months later, he found Jonah chopping wood near the cabin. The trader asked after Mary. Jonah said she'd taken sick and gone to stay with relatives. There were no relatives. A few years later, 2 children appeared on the property. Pale. Quiet. With eyes that didn't seem to know the difference between daylight and shadow. The first real record of what had happened didn't surface until after the Civil War. A Union soldier, lost in those same hills, stumbled upon the Wren homestead, now half-rotted, but still occupied. He wrote in his journal that he met a family of unnatural closeness. The parents, he said, claimed to be cousins, though their resemblance was uncanny. The soldier noted the children, 4 in total, with unusual features. Elongated skulls, uneven eyes, skin nearly translucent. He left the house disturbed and, as he put it, unsure of what part of Virginia I had wandered into. After the war, the region was left behind by time. The railroads never came that far. Poverty set in like rot. Outsiders forgot it existed. The Wrens remained, generation after generation, never venturing down from the ridge. Each new birth came from the same dwindling pool of names. Jonah. Mary. Elias. Over and over again. By the early 1900s, the family's bloodline had folded so many times it could no longer tell itself apart. People began to notice. A doctor from Abingdon was once called to treat a boy who'd fallen ill. He made the journey, and what he saw at the Wren cabin left him shaken for life. He described, in a letter to a colleague, a community of kin whose relations defy record-keeping, faces eerily similar, voices slow and soft, minds seemingly blurred by some inherited confusion. The doctor was advised not to return. Not out of fear for his safety, but because the locals believed the Wrens were God's punishment, and to interfere would only invite misfortune. For a time, the story vanished. Generations came and went. The Wrens became a rumor, an Appalachian ghost story told to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. But every rumor, no matter how faded, begins with something real. In the 1950s, an anthropology student from Richmond named Lila Thompson traveled to the region for her thesis on isolated mountain communities. She never meant to find the Wrens. But one evening, lost along an unmarked road, she stopped at a cabin to ask directions. In her surviving notes, found decades later, she wrote, "I heard laughter before I saw them. 2 figures in the yard. A man and a woman, middle-aged, sitting side by side. I assumed they were husband and wife, but their resemblance was uncanny. Identical eyes. Identical smiles. It wasn't until the woman referred to the man as brother that I realized what I had found. Lila stayed for supper. She described the meal as uncomfortably quiet. The family served cornbread and beans. The children spoke only in whispers. When Lila asked about their parents or grandparents, the answers looped in circles, names repeating, overlapping, like echoes down a dark hallway. That night, she left the cabin shaken. She later wrote, there was something deeply wrong, not just in their faces, but in their peace. As if they had accepted something unspeakable and turned it into their way of life. She submitted her report to the university. It was rejected. Her advisor told her it read, too gothic, too sensational. Lila's work was locked away and forgotten. But 50 years later, a journalist researching the same region uncovered her notes, along with census anomalies that seemed to confirm her claims. For nearly a century, the same surnames had repeated across marriage records. Wren. Collins. Wren again. Birth certificates listing both parents as siblings, cousins, sometimes both. What began as one family's isolation had turned into a generational labyrinth, a self-contained world built on secrecy and shame. And at its heart was a truth so grotesque, it could never survive daylight. Because, according to the records, Jonah and Mary weren't the last brother and sister to marry. They were the first. And somewhere in those mountains, their descendants still live, carrying a name that's been changed, rewritten, disguised under layers of small-town respectability. But the blood remembers. It always does. The Wren story isn't a ghost tale. It's a mirror. A reflection of what happens when isolation becomes tradition, when love becomes obsession, and when shame becomes legacy. They say that when the fog settles thick in the valley and the dogs refuse to bark, you can still hear laughter from a cabin that no longer stands, the echo of a brother and sister who believed their love could outlast the world that condemned them. But the truth is quieter than laughter. It's the sound of a door closing, generation after generation, until no one is left to open it again. And in that silence, the blood keeps speaking. They say that history doesn't just repeat, sometimes, it decays. By the time the 1970s came around, the Wren line had all but vanished from public record. But the blood never truly disappeared. It hid itself in new names, new towns, always clinging to the same hollow ridge where it began. The few who still lived there avoided the outside world, suspicious of anyone who came asking questions. There was one road in, unpaved, twisting through thickets of pine and fog. And on that road, in 1973, a county worker named Tom Riddick found something that still unsettles those who've read the report. He'd been sent to survey land for a proposed highway expansion. He hiked up past the ridge, following the line of an old fence. And there, among the rotted boards and wild blackberry, he came across the remains of a house that hadn't seen light in over 50 years. Inside, it was like time had refused to move forward. The furniture, handmade and warped with age. The wallpaper, yellowed and peeled, painted over with scripture. On the walls, he found markings, initials carved into the wood, repeating the same few names, Jonah, Mary, Elias. Again and again, like a prayer that refused to end. Riddick's report made its way to the county office, then quietly disappeared. The land wasn't developed. No one spoke of it again. But word has a way of moving through a town, especially in places where everyone knows everyone. Soon, the Wren name began to surface again, mostly in whispers, often in warnings. Don't go up there after dark. That family don't take to strangers. Yet, some did go. Out of curiosity. Out of arrogance. And they came back with stories too consistent to be dismissed as folklore. They spoke of a family who still lived deep in the woods, pale-skinned, light-eyed, soft-spoken. They said they were kind enough, but something in their manner, something behind their smiles, made your skin crawl. By the 1980s, that patch of Virginia was known among locals as the Blind Valley. Not because its people couldn't see, but because no one wanted to look too closely. It wasn't just about inbreeding anymore. It was about something else. Something spiritual. The Wrens had come to believe that their lineage was divine, that what outsiders called sin was, in their eyes, purity. A return to the origin. They told their children that the blood of their ancestors was sacred, and mixing it with outsiders would dilute the covenant. That belief passed down like scripture. Children were married before they were grown. Records were falsified or never made at all. Every generation blurred further into the one before it, until the names, the faces, the identities, all became one long echo of the same two people, Jonah and Mary. There are still photographs. Hidden in archives. Faded black and white images that feel like they were never meant to be taken. You can find them in certain forgotten collections, mountain portraiture from the 1930s and 40s. A man and woman sitting close together, their eyes eerily similar. You can't tell if they're siblings, or husband and wife. You can't tell if they even know anymore. In 1991, a journalist named Frank Bauer tried to break the silence. He'd heard rumors about the Pure family up in the Virginia hills and decided to write a feature for a regional paper. He hiked up alone. His article was never published. But a single note was found in his typewriter when police later searched his apartment. It said, "They don't hide because they're afraid. They hide because they're proud." The police called it a suicide. But those who knew him swore Frank was never the type to give up. The story might have died there, another whispered tragedy lost to time, if not for the rise of the internet. In the early 2000s, a local photographer named Jamie Klein posted a series of photos online titled The Wren Valley. They were haunting. Children with vacant eyes. Adults with faces both beautiful and wrong, as if sculpted from familiar parts placed in the wrong order. The photos went viral, then disappeared within days. Klein himself vanished soon after, his website wiped clean, his house found empty. Some say he moved away. Others believe he found something he wasn't meant to. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you run from it, or would you carry it like a curse you couldn't put down? Because the truth is, in America, these stories are more common than anyone wants to admit. The Hollers, the Valleys, the isolated families who never left their land, they've all got their own secrets. The Wrens just happen to be the ones history couldn't quite scrub away. Modern DNA studies have confirmed what those old legends whispered. Genetic bottlenecks, cases where generations of isolation cause entire bloodlines to turn inward. The effects aren't just physical. They change the way the brain forms, how empathy develops, how memory carries trauma across generations. What begins as survival, ends as something almost unrecognizable. And yet, every family keeps its myths. The Wrens believed theirs was love. That what the world called shame was actually devotion, a purity untouched by outsiders. When you trace the pattern long enough, you start to see it's not just their story. It's a mirror for the darker side of human nature, our need to belong, even when belonging destroys us. People still claim to see strange things in those hills. Lights flickering where no power lines run. Figures moving through fog long after midnight. A woman's laughter, faint and close, though no one's there. Some say it's the ghosts of the Wrens. Others say it's the living ones, descendants who never left, still keeping their covenant alive. One hunter in 2008 reported stumbling on an old cabin foundation, stone walls half sunken into the earth. In the dirt, he found a rusted locket. Inside were two tiny portraits. A man and a woman. Their faces almost identical. DNA from the locket was later tested. It matched samples from a nearby town, a family still living quietly under a different name. The Wrens, it seems, never left Virginia. They just learned how to blend in. And if you drive far enough down the old county roads, past where the map ends, you'll find them. You might even wave to them without knowing. A grocery clerk with light eyes and an unplaceable accent. A schoolteacher with a smile that lingers too long. You might walk past them every day, carrying a name that once belonged to someone else, but blood that hasn't changed for nearly 200 years. Every town has its story. Every lineage, its shadow. But the Wrens, they are the shadow. And the deeper you look, the more you realize, they were never just one family. They were a symptom. A wound left open too long, festering beneath the surface of America's oldest soil. They say that blood remembers, but memory isn't always kind. By the time the 21st century began, the Wrens had faded into something half-real, a ghost story for the internet age. Urban explorers whispered about a valley in Virginia where the trees grew too close, where the air never cleared, and where the people you met would smile as if they knew you from somewhere. But beneath those digital myths, beneath all the speculation and exaggeration, a handful of official records began to resurface. Property deeds. Marriage licenses. Death certificates with matching surnames, generation after generation. A genealogist named Peter Hall stumbled across them while researching Appalachian family lines in 2013. He wasn't looking for the Wrens, he didn't even know the name. But something in the data caught his eye: 200 years of marriages contained within a radius of less than 5 miles, all between families that shared at least one common ancestor. The deeper he dug, the less sense it made. He followed the trail up into the hills, to the ruins of a chapel built in 1889. Locals said it was still used now and then, for gatherings that no outsider ever saw. When Peter finally found it, the roof had collapsed, but the altar remained. And carved into its stone was a single phrase: the covenant of one blood. He took photos. He filed his findings. A few months later, he was gone, heart attack, they said, though his wife swore he'd never been sick a day in his life. When she emptied his office, she found a note paper-clipped to an old map of Virginia. On it, Peter had written only 4 words: "They know we're looking." That's the part of the story people don't talk about, the way the Wrens seem to follow the ones who dig too deep. Historians, photographers, journalists, even curious travelers. They go up into the hills looking for the truth, and the truth looks back. Because what was once a family became something closer to a faith, a lineage that worshipped itself. Their gatherings were said to happen only in the darkest part of winter, when the fog rolled in heavy and the world felt forgotten. No lights, no sound, just the murmur of prayers passed down in secret. Some called it superstition, but those who have stood in that valley at night say there's a weight in the air, a pressure that makes your ears ring and your thoughts scatter. Like something old is listening. The last confirmed sighting came in 2017. A team of documentarians set out to film a series on Appalachian isolation. One of them, a sound engineer named Clara Mason, later described what they found. They'd set up camp near the base of the ridge, filming local interviews, when they began to hear voices after midnight, faint, rhythmic, almost melodic. She followed the sound through the fog until she saw figures standing between the trees, hands clasped, faces hidden. She called out to them. None of them moved. Then one of the figures stepped forward, a woman, barefoot, her skin ghost pale against the darkness. Clara said the woman smiled and whispered, "You've come home." The footage from that night was never released. The production company said it was inconclusive. The team disbanded soon after. Clara moved across the country and never spoke publicly again. But if you ask the old families of Virginia about the Wrens, they won't tell you stories of monsters or ghosts. They'll tell you about the dangers of being forgotten. About what happens when a family cuts itself off from the world for so long that it starts to believe the world is the enemy. The Wrens weren't cursed. They were starved of connection, of new blood, of truth. And in that starvation, they created their own reality. Their love became their law. Their law became their worship. And their worship became a lineage that devoured itself from the inside out. That's the quiet horror of it, not the deformities, not the isolation, but the belief. The conviction that what they were doing was sacred. You can almost hear it in their silence, a sense of righteousness wrapped in madness, carried down like a hymn that no one dares to stop singing. Some people think the last of the Wrens are gone now. But the census tells a different story. A handful of descendants, under new names, spread across counties, never straying far from that ridge. Teachers. Farmers. Preachers. Ordinary faces. Their DNA tells the truth that their mouths won't, one line, spiraling inward for generations. And maybe that's what makes their story feel so heavy, because it's not really about them. It's about us. The way families keep their secrets. The way history edits itself. The way shame becomes inheritance. You can lock away the records, change the names, build new houses over the ruins, but the past doesn't forget. It waits. It watches. So the next time you're driving through Virginia, and you find yourself in one of those places where the GPS flickers and the road turns to gravel, look out toward the hills. If you see a house with smoke rising from its chimney, just one, alone against the trees, keep driving. Don't stop to ask for directions. Don't go looking for the story. Because some families never die. They just go quiet. And in the silence, the blood keeps speaking. Always. And maybe that's the most frightening part, not that they existed, but that they still do.